going to talk about artists working for social justice. This is a discussion of artist projects at side street projects that use dialogue as a methodology to mobilize communities around issues of social justice. We will look at artists who use conversation as a catalyst that allows people to explore, question, and propose collaborative solutions that can create sustained interventions in communities. Okay, take it away.
Okay. I'm going to touch a little bit on my organization, and it is, I guess, similar to the organization that they were working with in Bolivia. It's a platform for artist projects. So we're a 22-year-old, entirely mobile, artist-run organization, and our mission is to give artists of all ages the ability and means to support their creative endeavors. But basically, we teach the pragmatic end of being an artist, and for 22 years, we've been supporting artists that operate outside of the traditional gallery system, most specifically artists who choose to work in communities instead of galleries. And with it being a platform for that, I've become really obsessed with dialectical, socially engaged art projects. So our organization itself is kind of like a sustained art project. So we moved 6 times in like 13 years and often see our role in the gentrification process of communities where like we were in Santa Monica when Santa Monica wasn't that great, and then we moved to downtown, and we were at 4th and Main in downtown LA, which is now Gallery Row. It was Skid Row when we were there. And then we moved to Pasadena. We moved a whole bunch of times, and we got to a certain point that we were just like, screw it, let's put our organization on wheels. And that way, you know, we can go into blighted spaces that are in transition, and when they transition, rather than getting kicked out, we get up and we move to another community that needs our support. And for the last 16 years, we've been based in Northwest Pasadena, which is, people think of Pasadena, the Rose Parade, and like Millionaires Row, but there is a part of Pasadena that is segregated from the rest of the city by freeways, and it is the underserved part of the community. The neighborhood that we're in, the elementary school that we serve the most, which is the elementary school that represents most of the population in our immediate neighborhood, is 98.8% subsidized lunches right now. And it's a community that's really in transition. It was a predominantly African-American community. It was one of the first places where African-American people could buy property. And so it's like now there's a lot more immigrants moving into the neighborhood, and there's also young artists and scientists moving into the neighborhood. So I live in the neighborhood. And as a result of that, there's a lot of funny things going on with how people not talking to each other in the transition. So one of the primary projects I'm going to talk about is listening. But first I want to go over sort of when we first moved into this vacant lot, which just got leveled last week. We're now in the back of a high school, and that's we generate all our electricity and everything. The other part of the organization is we have a mobile youth education program that's been going on since before the organization became mobile. And again, I do feel like it's sort of a sustained system for connecting artists directly to communities. So they pulled shop out of schools. There's no funding for art. At this point, they're pulling, like, they don't even fund science anymore. And so, it's tragic. And so we have this mobile wood shop that goes around and teaches elementary schoolers design and fabrication using predominantly wood, pine, real saws with 5-year-olds. It's really cute. And even within this project, the way that I was able to get this project integrated into the curriculum in the school district was through years and years and years of dialogue. What we often use the saying, I can't remember whose it is, but history is made by those who show up. And so by going to a bunch of community meetings, being on the volunteer advisory committee that advises our curriculum in the school district, and then, you know, us being able to raise funds to bring resources in, we're able to really have a sustained intervention in the schools. So here's the adorableness of, those are actually 5th graders. That's at Washington Elementary School. cute kids with tools. That's inside one of our mobile classrooms. So, but it wasn't like I went to the schools and was like, you need this. It was like I listened a lot and was part of a lot of conversations, and then they figured out where they needed us and where we needed to plug in. And, you know, every 3 years, like we're doing a strategic plan right now, and I met with the district art coordinator, and I was like, all right, so what do you need? Because I'm strategic planning and I'm setting new goals. And they were like, well, let's figure out how to make this program that's not working work. And I'm like, well, that's not working. So let's just go pie in the sky and like figure out what could work. So, and then also the fact that we serve all the third graders in the school district, and then all the fifth graders at the school, where the fifth graders get an intensive 16-week curriculum that's very science-based, kinetic sculpture curriculum. STEAM is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Some people say STEM, but I like STEAM better. And that also allows us to be a trusted member of the community that allows us to bring in experimental art projects, and people respect us and are willing to be more open-minded and flexible about the type of art projects that we bring into the community. So when we first moved into the vacant lot that we were at for 6 years, it was a stalled senior housing development, and you can see that's a vacant lot. There's another vacant lot across the street. Or actually, that's a vacant lot next door, and then there's another vacant lot across the street. There's like, a lot of vacant land in that neighborhood. So when we first moved in, we did a project with Fallen Fruit. This is Matthias Wagner, who used to be a member of Fallen Fruit, who are the ones that map fruit trees that hang over property lines. And then he was partnering with another guy, Ari, from who had a project called Islands of LA National Park, where he would claim traffic islands as public lands. So they planted tomato plants in traffic islands all over Northeast LA. And then we planted tomato plants in this fake traffic island at our mobile headquarters with the neighborhood kids. So we do free art classes every Saturday. Sometimes it's the woodworking, and sometimes they're projects that engage the community as part of one of our art projects. Our current on-site artist project is You're Bombing Los Angeles, and Carol is here and doing some sort of discussion group at some point over this weekend. So what was really neat about this is when we first moved into the neighborhood, all the neighborhood kids live in apartments. We were exactly halfway between two parks, so it was too far for them to walk to either park. And we had this big land that they could come and hang out on, but we'd only meet the kids. And then when we started growing food with the kids, then they brought vegetables home to their parents and were excited about vegetables, and then we gained the respect of the parents. And that was sort of our foundation for our interaction in that community. And then there were a series of other food-related projects, including this really awesome one called an urban transplanter that plopped little vegetable seedlings out on the sidewalk. They would sprout down this conveyor belt. And then we were doing workshops where you could grow them in soda bottles, because we had this vertical garden FEMA trailer from MIT. So about 5 years of food-related projects, and it was interesting. I was presenting the series of food-related projects in Korea and explaining how the community ended up making a community garden. And they were like, well, why didn't you guys just make the community garden? And I realized, somehow being on the other side of the world made me realize that by having a bunch of projects that were playful and did sparked a bunch of conversations about growing food, down to people telling us what kind of vegetables to sprout next so that they could plop them out for their vegetable garden or whatever, or how to grow a vegetable garden in your window. We're not fully in a food desert. LA has a lot of areas that are totally food desert. Like there's that guy Ron Finley in South Central that's doing really amazing stuff that I'm actually working with him now. But in our neighborhood, there is a grocery store. It charges twice as much for produce as the one in the nice neighborhood down the street. And so it's 50 cents a lime. I mean, it's ridiculous. So there is not access.
I was just gonna
say. Really? Well, sorry, California. That'll change with the drought. I have a lime tree in my garden. It's going to bite us in the ass with this drought. But the fact that it's 50 cents a lime, and then you go to the neighborhood with the $1 million houses, and it's the exact same grocery chain, and you can get 5 for $1 there. And so they're price gouging. So it really, like, it started conversations about food, but then by having those conversations, it allowed the community to decide what their own intervention was that then makes it sustainable beyond the life of the project, which is something you guys were talking about a little bit with this one. And that's kind of where my obsession lies. So more recently, we had this project called Listening as a Movement with an artist named Alana Mann. It was one of the most amazing projects we'd ever hosted. The only intervention was listening. And so I commissioned her to do it as a result of both the fact that the communities in transition and the different demographic populations felt in competition with each other, were not talking to each other. And then there was also the dissolution of the CRA, which I don't know how much that impacted you guys out here, but it was this community redevelopment funds that came down the government chain and was deemed unconstitutional. But in our community, it was there was like these PACs that were supposed to oversee how that money was spent. And they were a really important voice of the community. And so when the CRA got dissolved, people were really upset. We also have a neighborhood-specific commission, which is the only neighborhood-specific commission in the city because it's the underrepresented community. And the CRA responsibilities were getting dumped on that commission, and then there were these weird meetings happening behind closed doors with city council people deciding who from the PACs were going to get appointed to the commission, which again was happening in a non-democratic way. And ultimately nobody was listening to each other. And it was like, really like, people were just butting heads. And it was really frustrating for me as somebody who lives in that community, who in some cases was not considered a part of the community, even though I've been working there for 15 years and I bought a house there. And but then also just seeing that people were standing in the way of progress just because nobody could listen. And so Alana was doing this work about listening. I also had these really rad sculptures. So this is like a giant round room that you can go inside of, and we worked with an acoustical engineer and then sound, and then there was a little tiny round room inside of it. And so when you went in there and you talked, the sound would sort of spiral around the space. And then if you went into the little tiny room, you could be by yourself, or you could really only fit 2 people in there. I always found it entertaining to like put a donor in there and just shut the door. I'm like, I'm not going in with you. But and then the satellite dish was another one where it would echo back on you, and then there were these really cool horns, which that you could there was like a little thing on the end of it that you could put on your ear, and you could listen to the street, and like you could really hear. I'm a gearhead because of the mobile organization. You could like hear the cylinders fire on vehicles driving down the street, and then you turn it the other way. There's a giant mountain in the background, and you could hear the mountain. Like it was really neat. And it was all these different really playful ways to interact with each other. But then we also did a series of, actually before we even started the project, within dialogue, I find that the methodology of exploration, or not in the colonial sense, but going through, like I was interviewing somebody recently, and he was like, before you even go work in a community, like, go to the liquor store and ask the guy that runs the liquor store, like, what's changing? What are you afraid of? Like, how does it work around here? And like just going and talking to the different stakeholders, and ultimately you have to develop the language of how you need to talk to the different stakeholders. And